The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital emergency room hummed overhead as Marcus Rivera adjusted his navy blue scrubs for the third time that morning. His first day. At 34 years old, he was starting over, and the weight of that reality pressed against his chest like a physical force. "You must be our new nurse." A woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun approached with an outstretched hand. "I'm Sandra Chen, head nurse on this shift. Welcome to the chaos." Marcus shook her hand, nodding the firm grip, the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "Marcus Rivera, thank you for having me." Sandra's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Well, you're certainly more polite than the last rookie we had. Come on, I'll show you around before the morning rush hits." As they walked through the bustling ER, Marcus's eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits, counting personnel, assessing sight lines. Old habits. Habits he was supposed to be leaving behind. He forced himself to focus on Sandra's words as she pointed out supply closets, break rooms, and the nurse's station. "You'll be shadowing me for the first week," Sandra explained, pulling up a patient chart on the computer. "Then we'll see how you do on your own. Where did you do your clinical rotations?" "UC San Diego Medical Center," Marcus replied, his standard answer. True, but incomplete, just like everything else about his carefully constructed new identity. The first few hours passed in a blur of vitals checks, medication administration, and patient assessments. Marcus moved through the tasks with methodical precision, his hands steady and sure. But it was during his third patient interaction that Sandra first noticed something unusual. An elderly veteran named Bill Patterson had come in complaining of chest pain. As Marcus took his blood pressure, the old man's eyes fixed on the scars visible on Marcus's forearms, faint white lines that could have been from anything, but weren't. "You serve?" Bill asked quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I did, long time ago." "Which branch?" "Navy." The word came out clipped final. Bill nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken message. Some things weren't meant to be discussed, but Sandra, standing nearby and reviewing the EKG results, filed the interaction away. There was something in Marcus's tone, something that didn't match the friendly rookie persona. The real test came just before lunch. A trauma call crackled over the radio. Motorcycle accident, multiple injuries, ETA 3 minutes. The ER exploded into controlled chaos as staff prepared for the incoming patient. Sandra watched as the color drained from the faces of the other new nurses, their nervousness palpable. But not Marcus. His expression didn't change at all. If anything, he seemed to grow calmer, more focused. His movements became even more precise as he helped set up the trauma bay, positioning equipment with an efficiency that suggested intimate familiarity with emergency situations. When the paramedics burst through the doors with the patient, a young man in his 20s, bleeding heavily from a head wound and a compound fracture in his left leg, the ER descended into organized pandemonium. "I need vitals," shouted Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the attending physician, a tall Nigerian woman with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. "And someone get me a pressure dressing on that leg now." Marcus moved before anyone else could react. While a more experienced nurse fumbled with the blood pressure cuff, Marcus had already applied direct pressure to the leg wound, his hands moving with such speed and confidence that Dr. Okonkwo's head snapped toward him. "BP dropping 90/60, called out another nurse. "We're losing him," Dr. Okonkwo said tersely. "I need 2 large-bore IVs. Start running lactated ringers wide open." "On it," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise with an authority that didn't belong to a rookie nurse on his first day. He had an IV line established in the patient's right arm in under 30 seconds, his movements so fluid they seemed almost automatic. "Where the hell did you learn to do that so fast?" asked Jake, a young nurse who'd been working the ER for 2 years and still struggled with difficult IV placements. Marcus didn't answer, his attention focused entirely on the patient. Pulse is thready, possible internal bleeding. We should get him to surgery. Dr. Okonkwo stared at him for a beat longer than necessary. You're absolutely right, call upstairs. She paused, studying the new nurse with open curiosity. Rivera, is it? Yes, ma'am. Where did you train before nursing school? The question hung in the air. Marcus's hands never stopped moving, checking the IV line, monitoring the patient's color, adjusting the oxygen mask. I had some previous medical experience, emergency medicine. It wasn't technically a lie. Combat medicine was emergency medicine, just in the worst possible conditions. But Dr. Okonkwo's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing there was more to the story. As they wheeled the patient toward the elevators, Sandra pulled Marcus aside. That was impressive work for a first-day rookie. Just did what needed to be done, Marcus replied, already stripping off his bloodied gloves. Marcus, I've been doing this for 23 years. I've trained dozens of new nurses. None of them move like you do. None of them have that kind of composure under pressure on their first trauma case. She crossed her arms, not accusatory but genuinely curious. What's your story? For a moment, something flickered across Marcus's face. A shadow of memory, of pain, of things he'd seen and done that couldn't be put into words. Then the mask slipped back into place, and he offered a small, tight smile. Just want to help people, Sandra, that's all. But as he walked away to clean up, Sandra watched him go with a frown. She'd been around enough veterans, enough people running from their pasts, to recognize the signs. The scars on his hands that looked like rope burns. The way his eyes constantly scanned the room, always knowing where the exits were. The unnatural calm in the face of blood and chaos. The crisp, economical movements that spoke of training far beyond nursing school. Marcus Rivera was hiding something big. That night, as Marcus sat alone in his sparsely furnished apartment, he stared at the locked drawer in his bedside table. Inside was a small black box containing the only piece of his former life he'd kept, a gold trident pin, the insignia of a Navy SEAL. He'd sworn he was done with that world. The missions, the violence, the nightmares that still woke him at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat. Nursing was supposed to be his redemption, his second chance to save lives instead of taking them. But today had felt too familiar, too easy. The adrenaline, the split-second decisions, the controlled chaos. Maybe you can't ever really leave it behind, he thought. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, not knowing that in just a few months, his carefully buried past would come roaring back to life in the most violent way possible. 3 months had passed since Marcus Rivera's first day at St. Catherine's Hospital, and he'd settled into a rhythm that almost felt normal. Almost. But normal was a luxury men like him didn't get to keep for long. It was a Tuesday morning when the cracks in his carefully constructed facade began to show. Marcus was restocking supplies in exam room 4 when a visitor's child popped a balloon in the waiting area. The sharp bang echoed through the like a gunshot. Marcus's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He dropped to a crouch behind the supply cart, his hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. His heart hammered against his ribs, and for 3 seconds he wasn't in San Diego anymore. He was back in Ramadi, Iraq, dust in his mouth, the taste of copper and fear. Marcus, you okay? He blinked hard, forcing himself back to the present. Sandra stood in the doorway, concern etched across her face. The supply cart lay on its side, bandages and syringes scattered across the floor. Yeah, he managed, his voice rough. Just lost my grip. Sandra's expression said she didn't believe him, but she was kind enough not to push. Take 5 if you need it. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He gathered the supplies with shaking hands, hating the weakness, hating that after all this time his body still betrayed him. In the staff bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection. The man looking back at him had the same dark eyes, the same strong jawline, but there was something haunted in that gaze, something that no amount of distance or career changes could erase. "You're not there anymore," he told himself. "You're here, you're safe." But were the people around him safe? That was the question that kept him awake at night. The afternoon shift brought a case that would test him in ways he hadn't anticipated. A veteran named James Kowalski, 42 years old, came in clutching his chest. The triage nurse flagged it as a possible cardiac event, but when Marcus entered the room, he recognized something else entirely. Kowalski sat on the edge of the bed, his breathing rapid and shallow, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool room temperature. His eyes darted constantly to the door, to the windows, never settling. "Mr. Kowalski, I'm Marcus. I'll be your nurse today. Can you tell me what's going on?" "Can't breathe," Kowalski gasped. "My chest feels like it's being crushed." Marcus checked his vitals while asking standard questions about medical history, medications, recent stressors. But he was also watching Kowalski's body language, the way his hands trembled, the hypervigilance in his eyes. "Mr. Kowalski, were you in the military?" The man's eyes snapped to Marcus's face, something flickering in their depths. "Marines, 2 tour in Afghanistan. Why?" "Because I think you're having a panic attack, not a heart attack." Marcus kept his voice gentle, non-judgmental. "I've seen this before. Hell, I've experienced it myself." Kowalski's jaw clenched. "I'm not some weak." "It's not weakness," Marcus interrupted firmly. "It's your nervous system responding to trauma. Your brain thinks you're still in danger even though you're not." He pulled up a chair, sitting so he was at eye level with Kowalski. "Try this breathing technique with me. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. You probably learned it in training." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus talked Kowalski through the panic attack, using techniques he'd learned not from nursing school but from the mandatory PTSD counseling sessions after his medical discharge. By the time Dr. Okonkwo came in to examine the patient, Kowalski's vitals had normalized, and some of the terror had left his eyes. "Whatever you did, it worked," Dr. Okonkwo said later, catching Marcus in the hallway. "That man was convinced he was dying." "Just talk to him, veteran to veteran." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "You're a veteran. That explains a lot, actually." "Does it?" Marcus asked, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "The way you handle trauma cases, your composure, the fact that you're better at triage than nurses with 5 years' experience." She studied him thoughtfully. "What branch?" "Navy." "Deployed." "Yes." "Combat." Marcus's expression closed off. "Dr. Okonkwo, with respect, I'd rather not." "It's Patricia," she said, her voice softening. "And I'm not trying to pry. I just want you to know that if you ever need to talk, my door is open. I've worked with a lot of veterans. I know the transition can be brutal." Something in her kindness made Marcus's throat tighten. "Thank you, I appreciate that." As she walked away, Marcus leaned against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. 3 months, and he was already tired of maintaining the pretense, of being only half of who he was. That night, the nightmare came back with a vengeance. He was in a compound outside Mosul, moving through corridors with his team. The smell of cordite and sweat, the weight of his rifle, the sound of his own breathing inside his helmet. They were hunting a high-value target, and intelligence said he was holed up on the 2nd floor. Marcus took point, his movements silent and sure. He cleared the first room empty, the second clear. At the third door, something made him pause, an instinct honed through dozens of missions, a sixth sense that had kept him alive. "Wait," he whispered into his comms. But before he could elaborate, the door exploded outward. The blast threw him backward, his body slamming into the wall. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard screaming, his teammates, his brothers. Fire everywhere, blood on his hands. Danny Martinez, his best friend since Bud's training, lying motionless in the rubble. DNY, stay with me. Marcus jolted awake, his sheets soaked with sweat, his heart racing like he'd just run a marathon. It took him a full minute to remember where he was. San Diego, his apartment, safe. But Danny was still dead. Still dead because Marcus had hesitated, because his instinct had been right but his warning had come too late. He checked his phone, 3:17 a.m., same time he always woke up. He wouldn't sleep again tonight. In the kitchen, Marcus made coffee and stood at the window, watching the city lights. This was why he'd left, why he'd spent 2 years in nursing school, starting over from scratch. Because he couldn't save Danny, couldn't save half the people he'd cared about in that life. But maybe he could save someone here. Maybe that would be enough. When he returned to work the next day, Sandra noticed the dark circles under his eyes but said nothing. She'd learned that Marcus opened up on his own terms, if at all. During lunch, he sat in the courtyard, eating a sandwich without tasting it. A group of nurses nearby were laughing about something, their joy a stark contrast to the darkness churning in his mind. Mind if I join you? Marcus looked up to find Dr. Okonkwo, Patricia, standing there with a salad. It's a free country, he said, gesturing to the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Patricia spoke. That veteran yesterday, Kowalski, he left me a message this morning. Said you gave him the number for the VA crisis line and a list of PTSD support groups. Seemed like he needed it. You went above and beyond. That's not in your job description. Marcus shrugged. Maybe it should be. Patricia took a bite of her salad, considering her next words carefully. My father was Army, Vietnam. He came home a different person than the one who left. Angry, distant, plagued by nightmares. It took him years to even admit he had PTSD. She met Marcus's eyes. I learned early that the people who have seen the worst of humanity often need the most support, even when they're the last to ask for it. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, just a little. Your father, is he? He passed 5 years ago. Heart attack. Patricia's smile was sad but warm. But before he died, he told me he wished he'd gotten help sooner, that he'd lost years being too proud, too stubborn to admit he was struggling. The message was clear. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind. As Patricia walked back inside, Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at a contact he hadn't called in months, Dr. Helen Reeves, the therapist the Navy had assigned him during his medical separation. He'd stopped going to sessions 6 months ago, convinced he could handle it on his own. Maybe it was time to admit he couldn't. He was about to dial when his pager went off. Trauma incoming. Multiple vehicle collision. Marcus threw his lunch in the trash and sprinted back to the ER, the therapist's number forgotten for now. But the seed had been planted. Change was coming, even if Marcus didn't know it yet. And in 3 weeks, an armed gunman would walk through those doors, and everything Marcus had been running from would come crashing back into his life. The Tuesday morning shift started like any other. Marcus clocked in at 6:45 a.m., grabbed a cup of terrible hospital coffee, and reviewed the patient board with Sandra. 16 beds occupied, 3 pending discharges, 2 admissions expected within the hour. Routine. Manageable. Boring even. By 9:30 a.m., the ER had hit its usual mid-morning lull. The night shift's trauma cases had been stabilized and moved upstairs. The waiting room held the typical assortment of non-emergency cases: a sprained ankle, possible strep throat, a child with an earache whose mother had been waiting for 40 minutes and was growing increasingly impatient. Marcus was in exam room 7 with Mrs. Alina Fitzgerald, an 82-year-old woman with congestive heart failure who came in weekly, less for medical reasons and more because she was lonely. He was adjusting her IV flow rate while she told him about her grandson's acceptance to UCLA when he heard the automatic doors whoosh open in the waiting area. Something made him glance up. Call it instinct. Call it muscle memory. Call it the sixth sense that had kept him alive through 13 combat deployments. Through the small window in the exam room door, Marcus had a partial view of the waiting area. A man was entering, mid-30s, Caucasian, wearing a wrinkled olive-green jacket despite the 70-degree weather. His hair was greasy and unkempt, his movements jerky and agitated. But it was his eyes that triggered every alarm bell in Marcus's nervous system. They had that 1,000-yard stare Marcus had seen before, in men pushed far past their breaking point. The man's right hand was buried deep in his jacket pocket, and his left hand trembled violently at his side. "Marcus, dear, are you listening?" Mrs. Fitzgerald asked, pulling his attention back. "Yes, ma'am, sorry. UCLA is wonderful, you must be very." The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder in a clear sky. Time fractured into crystalline shards of hyperreality. Marcus's body responded before his conscious mind caught up, every cell remembering training that had been beaten into him through years of hell. His hand shot out, pushing Mrs. Fitzgerald's wheelchair away from the door and toward the corner of the room, safest position, away from potential lines of fire. "Get down and stay down," he commanded. His voice transformed from the gentle nurse she knew into something else entirely, something hard and military and absolute. The second shot followed immediately, and then screaming erupted like a flood breaking through a dam. Marcus moved to the door, pressing himself against the wall beside it, using the frame for cover while he assessed the situation through the narrow window. What he saw made his blood run cold. The man with the olive jacket stood in the center of the waiting room, both hands now visible. In his right hand was a black semi-automatic pistol, looked like a Glock 19 from this distance, 15-round standard magazine capacity, possibly more if he had an extended mag. The man waved the weapon wildly, and patients and visitors scattered like frightened birds, some diving behind chairs, others fleeing toward the main entrance. "Where is she?" the gunman shrieked, his voice cracking with emotion and something else. Drugs, maybe methamphetamine or cocaine based on the agitation and paranoia. "Where's my wife? Someone tell me where Sarah is." A young mother clutched her toddler, pressing the child's face against her shoulder as she crouched behind the reception desk. An elderly man in a wheelchair sat frozen in the middle of the floor, too scared to move. The receptionist, Maria, had her hands raised, her face pale as death. Marcus's training assessment ran automatically. One hostile, visibly armed, altered mental status, extreme agitation. Civilian count in immediate danger zone, approximately 35. Staff count 7 visible. Exits main entrance blocked by hostile, secondary exit through ER corridor 30 feet away. Cover minimal, mostly plastic chairs and a wooden reception desk. Engagement range, approximately 40 feet from his position. Then the man fired a third shot into the ceiling. Acoustic tiles exploded, raining down white powder and debris. The screaming intensified. "I said, where is Sarah?" The gunman's voice broke into a sob. "She works here, somebody call her. Tell her Trevor's here. Tell her I just want to talk." Trevor, name identified. Likely domestic situation. Estranged spouse escalating to violence. Statistically the most dangerous type of active shooter. Emotionally unstable, specific target, nothing to lose. Marcus's heart rate had actually slowed, dropping into the controlled rhythm his body adopted during combat operations. 62 beats per minute. His breathing was measured, deep, oxygenating his blood. His hands were steady as stone. But everyone else was falling apart. Through the window, he could see Sandra at the nurse's station, her face frozen in terror, one hand halfway to the phone. Jake, the young nurse, had dropped behind the desk, his body curled into a ball. Dr. Okonkwo stood in the doorway of exam room 3, her eyes wide, clearly running through mental calculations of how to protect her patient. A code should have been called by now. Security should have been alerted, but everyone was paralyzed by shock and fear. Everyone except Marcus. He could hear Mrs. Fitzgerald whimpering behind him. Oh God, what's happening?" "Stay exactly where you are," Marcus said quietly, not taking his eyes off the gunman. "Don't move, don't make a sound." Trevor was moving now, grabbing people randomly, shoving them, demanding they produce Sarah. He grabbed the elderly man in the wheelchair, pressing the gun against his temple. The man's face went gray, his lips moving in what might have been prayer. "I'm calling her right now," Maria shouted from behind the desk, her voice shaking so badly the words were almost unintelligible. "Just please don't hurt anyone." "Call her," Trevor screamed. "Call her and tell her if she doesn't come down here in 5 minutes I start shooting people. 1 every minute, you understand me? 1 every minute." The situation had just escalated from active shooter to hostage scenario with a ticking clock. 5 minutes before he started executing civilians. Marcus felt the familiar cold clarity settle over him, the mental state seals called the ice. Emotions shut down. Hesitation evaporated. There was only the mission: neutralize the threat, minimize casualties, protect the innocent. He scanned the room again, this time looking for tactical advantages. The gunman was positioned poorly, center of the room, multiple angles of approach, his attention divided among too many targets. He was waving the gun around carelessly, finger on the trigger, no discipline. Amateur, dangerous precisely because he was unpredictable. Marcus could take him, he knew he could. The distance was manageable, the approach vectors were there. He'd done this before in worse conditions against better trained opponents. But he was a nurse now, not a SEAL, not a warrior, just a civilian in scrubs who was supposed to call security and wait for the police like everyone else. Except people would die while they waited. The elderly man Trevor was holding started to cry, tears running down his weathered face. The young mother's toddler began to wail. Someone's phone was ringing, the cheerful ringtone obscenely out of place. 4 minutes and 30 seconds until Trevor started killing people. Marcus looked at his hands, the hands of a healer now, a helper, someone who'd sworn to do no harm. But they were also the hands that had disarmed insurgents, that had fought and survived in the world's worst hellholes. "Marcus," Mrs. Fitzgerald whispered from behind him, "what do we do?" He took a deep breath, and in that moment Marcus Rivera made a choice. He couldn't stand by and watch innocent people die. Not again. Not when he had the skills to stop it. The nurse might have to step aside. The warrior would have to return. "Stay here," he told Mrs. Fitzgerald. "No matter what you hear, don't move." He opened the exam room door and stepped into the hallway, moving with purpose toward the waiting room where hell had just arrived. 4 minutes remaining. Marcus moved through the corridor with deliberate precision, each step calculated, his body operating on instincts honed through thousands of hours of the most brutal training on Earth. His mind had shifted into what his old team leader used to call combat consciousness, a state of heightened awareness where time seemed to slow down and every detail became magnified with crystal clarity. He could hear Sandra's ragged breathing from the nurse's station 15 feet to his left, could smell the acrid scent of gunpowder still hanging in the air from the ceiling shots, could feel the slight give in the linoleum floor beneath his feet, calculating traction and movement potential. 3 minutes and 45 seconds until Trevor started executing hostages. As Marcus emerged from the corridor into the waiting area, he kept his hands visible and open at his sides, his body language deliberately non-threatening. Trevor was still in the center of the room, the gun now pointed at the young mother with the toddler. The woman was sobbing, trying to shield her child with her body. "Please," she begged, "please, my baby." "Shut up, shut up." Trevor's hand was shaking so violently Marcus could see it from 20 feet away. The man was coming apart at the seams, which made him exponentially more dangerous. Unstable people pulled triggers. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, calm, authoritative, but not aggressive. "Trevor." The gunman's head snapped toward him, eyes wild. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Marcus. I'm a nurse here." He took one measured step forward, hands still visible. "I can help you find Sarah." "Stay back." Trevor swung the gun toward Marcus and several people screamed. But Marcus didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He'd had guns pointed at him more times than he could count, by people far more dangerous than this broken man. Behind the nurse's station, Sandra watched in disbelief as Marcus continued moving forward, slowly, carefully, but forward nonetheless. This wasn't the quiet, reserved nurse she'd worked with for 3 months. This was someone else entirely. Someone who moved like he owned the space, like the gun pointed at his chest was merely an inconvenience rather than a death sentence. "I said stay back," Trevor's voice cracked. "I will," Marcus said, stopping about 12 feet away, close enough to engage if necessary, far enough not to trigger an immediate threat response. "But Trevor, I need you to hear me. Sarah isn't in this building right now." "You're lying." "I'm not. I can prove it." Marcus's eyes never left Trevor's face, reading every micro-expression, every tick. "Maria, you have the staff directory up, right?" From behind the reception desk, Maria's trembling voice answered, "Why, yes." "Check it, Sarah." Marcus left the question hanging. "Brennan," Trevor supplied automatically. "Sarah Brennan, radiology." "Check for Sarah Brennan," Marcus instructed Maria, his tone measured. "Tell us what shift she's working." There was a pause filled only with the sound of Trevor's heavy breathing and someone's muffled crying. Then Maria spoke up, her voice shaking but clear. "Sarah Brennan. She's not scheduled until the 3 p.m. shift. She's not in the building." Trevor's face contorted with confusion and rage. No, she has to be here. She's always here in the mornings. She changed her schedule to avoid me." Marcus could see the spiral beginning, paranoia feeding on itself, logic giving way to emotion. He had maybe 2 minutes before Trevor descended into complete irrationality. "Trevor, look at me." Marcus's voice took on a different quality, something his old team members would have recognized instantly, the tone he used when talking down terrified civilians in war zones, when convincing frightened families that the heavily armed Americans breaking into their homes weren't there to hurt them. "I believe you want to see Sarah. I believe you need to talk to her. But this isn't the way to make that happen. She won't answer my calls. She got a restraining order." Trevor's eyes were wet now, tears mixing with sweat. "I just need to explain." "I understand," Marcus said, and he did. He'd seen this pattern before, seen what desperation could drive people to do. "But if you hurt someone here, Sarah will never speak to you again. The police will come. You'll go to prison. You'll lose any chance you have of fixing this." Dr. Patricia Okonkwo watched from the doorway of exam room 3, her heart pounding. She'd worked in emergency medicine for 15 years, had seen countless crises, but she'd never seen anything like this. Marcus Rivera, the rookie nurse who'd been here less than 4 months, was negotiating with an armed gunman like it was routine. His body language, his tactical positioning, the way he controlled his voice and breathing, this wasn't something you learned in nursing school. Who is he? She thought, even as part of her brain cataloged exactly what she was witnessing. Military training, almost certainly special operations given the level of composure, the tactical awareness evident in how he'd positioned himself between the gunman and the largest cluster of civilians. Trevor was wavering now, the gun lowering slightly. I just need to talk to her." "We can make that happen," Marcus said, taking another small step forward. "But not like this, brother." The word brother was deliberate, creating connection, establishing empathy. Marcus could see Trevor's psychological profile clearly. Former military or law enforcement based on his weapon handling, experiencing a mental health crisis, probably substance abuse compounding underlying PTSD or depression. A man who felt he'd lost everything and was making one last desperate stand. Marcus knew that man. Hell, he'd been that man, standing on the edge of the abyss, one bad decision away from disaster. "Let these people go," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Keep me. I'll stay with you. We'll call Sarah together and I'll help you talk to her." "Marcus, no," Sandra hissed from the nurse's station, but he didn't acknowledge her. Trevor stared at him, the gun now pointed at the floor, his whole body trembling. Why would you do that?" "Because I've been where you are," Marcus said simply. "Not exactly, but close enough. When everything falls apart and you can't see a way forward, when it feels like the whole world has turned against you." He took one more step, now only 8 feet away. "But this isn't the answer. You know it isn't." For a moment, Marcus thought he'd gotten through. Trevor's shoulders slumped, his finger moved off the trigger, and hope flickered in those desperate eyes. Then Trevor's phone buzzed in his pocket. The sound was like a bomb detonating. Trevor fumbled for the phone with his left hand, keeping the gun in his right, and stared at the screen. His face, already pale and sweat-soaked, turned absolutely white. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Marcus saw the text message reflected in Trevor's eyes, saw the exact moment something inside the man shattered completely. She's getting remarried," Trevor said, his voice hollow. "She sent me a message. She's getting remarried to that bastard from her gym." His face twisted with anguish and fury. "She moved on, like I never mattered, like 10 years together meant nothing." The gun came back up, and this time Trevor's eyes held something that made Marcus's blood run cold, the look of a man who decided he had nothing left to lose. Trevor turned, and the gun swung toward the pregnant nurse who'd been hiding near the corridor exit, frozen in fear. "If I can't have a future, why should anyone else?" Trevor's voice was dead, emotionless now, which was infinitely more terrifying than the screaming had been. Marcus's body coiled, every muscle tensing. The distance, 8 feet. Trevor's reaction time, compromised by emotional distress and likely drug use, maybe 0.8 seconds. Time to target acquisition and fire, 0.4 seconds. Window for engagement, 0.4 seconds. It was enough. It had to be enough. Behind the nurse's station, Sandra watched Marcus's entire posture change. The nurse disappeared completely, replaced by something else, something predatory and precise. She saw his weight shift forward onto the balls of his feet, saw his hands move into a position she didn't recognize but that looked practiced, efficient, deadly. Dr. Okonkwo saw it too. "Oh my God," she breathed, realizing what was about to happen. Trevor's finger tightened on the trigger, the pregnant nurse's scream building in her throat. Marcus moved. The world contracted into a tunnel of absolute focus. Marcus's vision sharpened until he could see individual beads of sweat rolling down Trevor's temple, could track the microscopic movement of his trigger finger beginning its fatal press, could calculate trajectories and angles with mathematical precision. 8 feet became 0 in less than 2 seconds. Marcus exploded forward with a speed that defied belief for someone who'd been standing still a heartbeat before. His first step covered 3 feet, his body low and driving, using angles to move outside Trevor's immediate line of sight. The second step brought him into striking range. Trevor's peripheral vision caught the movement, and he started to swing the gun back toward Marcus. But he was operating in normal human time while Marcus moved in combat time. That accelerated state where a second stretched into an eternity, and every fraction of movement could be seen, analyzed, and countered. Marcus's left hand came up in a sharp, precise arc, executing a technique he drilled 10,000 times in close-quarters combat training. His hand struck Trevor's wrist with surgical accuracy, hitting the nerve cluster on the inside of the forearm. The impact wasn't brutally hard. Marcus maintained enough control even in motion to modulate his force, but it was perfectly placed. The gun discharged as Trevor's hand spasmed, the bullet meant for the pregnant nurse instead punching harmlessly into the acoustic tile ceiling. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, But Marcus's hearing had already adjusted, his body anticipating the shock. His right hand moved simultaneously, grabbing Trevor's gun hand and rotating it violently outward and down, a wrist lock that would have broken bones if Marcus had applied full pressure. But even now, even in the midst of violent action, the nurse inside him calibrated his response. Disable, don't destroy. Control, don't kill. Trevor screamed as the gun tumbled from his nerveless fingers, clattering across the linoleum floor. Marcus kicked it away without looking, his eyes never leaving Trevor's body, tracking for secondary weapons, for any continued threat. The entire gunman never had time to process what was happening. One moment he'd been pulling the trigger, the next his weapon was gone and his world was spinning. Marcus's foot swept Trevor's legs out from under him, and the man crashed face first onto the floor. Before Trevor could even attempt to rise, Marcus was on him. His knee drove into the small of Trevor's back, positioned precisely to immobilize without causing spinal injury. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, right hand controlling Trevor's gun arm, hyperextending it just enough to prevent any resistance but not enough to dislocate the shoulder. Left hand on the back of Trevor's neck, applying pressure to the nerve clusters there, inducing compliance through pain management rather than injury. "Don't move," Marcus commanded, his voice absolutely calm, devoid of emotion. "Stay down and you don't get hurt." Trevor tried to struggle, adrenaline and desperation giving him strength, but it was like a child fighting an adult. Marcus adjusted his position fractionally, applying leverage that made resistance not just futile but painful, and Trevor went still with a sob of defeat. The entire engagement, from Trevor's finger on the trigger to him pinned helplessly on the floor, had lasted exactly 4.5 seconds. The waiting room was absolutely silent except for Trevor's ragged breathing and crying. Everyone who'd witnessed it was frozen in shock, their brains struggling to process what they'd just seen. Sandra stood behind the nurse's station, her mouth hanging open. She'd blinked, and in that blink Marcus had moved 20 feet and disarmed a gunman. The movement had been so fast, so fluid, so utterly professional that her mind kept trying to replay it, to understand how it was possible. Dr. Okonkwo pressed her hand against the doorframe, her legs suddenly weak. She'd seen combat footage, had watched military documentaries, but seeing it live, seeing that level of skill and control executed right in front of her, was entirely different. This wasn't random luck or adrenaline-fueled heroics. This was pure, refined expertise. Jake, the young nurse who'd been hiding behind the desk, slowly raised his head, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell?" he whispered. Marcus maintained his position, his breathing controlled, his focus absolute. He could feel Trevor's pulse through the contact points, elevated but not dangerous, around 140 BPM. The man was sobbing now, all the fight gone out of him, replaced by crushing despair. "It's over, brother," Marcus said quietly, his voice gentle now. "It's over, you're going to be okay." "I wanted to die," Trevor choked out between sobs. "I wanted them to kill me. I wanted it to end." "I know," Marcus said, and he did. "But this isn't how your story ends. There's help. There's a way through this." His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking Trevor for additional weapons. He found a folding knife in the jacket pocket, removed it, and slid it across the floor towards Sandra. Clear and safe. "Someone call security and 911, Marcus instructed, his voice still carrying that military authority. "Tell them the situation is contained. Suspect is disarmed and restrained. No injuries except minor cuts from ceiling debris." Maria fumbled for the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. The pregnant nurse who'd been seconds from death slid down the wall, her hands wrapped protectively around her belly, tears streaming down her face. The young mother clutched her toddler, who was wailing now. The elderly man in the wheelchair had his head bowed, lips still moving in prayer. Marcus's knee remained firmly planted on Trevor's back, but his left hand moved to check the man's carotid pulse, still nursing, even now. Trevor was having a full breakdown beneath him, his body shaking with sobs, and Marcus felt a wave of profound sadness wash over him. This could have been me, he thought. So easily this could have been me. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing closer. The cavalry was coming, but they were too late. The crisis was already over. Sandra finally found her voice. "Marcus, how did you?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Not yet. His hands were steady on Trevor's wrist, his knee maintaining perfect pressure, his body remembering how to do this even though his mind had tried so hard to forget. Dr. Okonkwo approached slowly, carefully, as if Marcus himself might be dangerous. "Marcus, I need you to tell me right now, what's your training?" Before he could respond, the main entrance burst open and 4 security guards rushed in, followed 30 seconds later by 2 San Diego police officers with weapons drawn. "SDPD, nobody move." "Suspect is contained and disarmed," Marcus called out, his voice professionally neutral. "One suspect, 1 weapon secured, no injuries. I'm a hospital nurse, maintaining physical restraint." The officers approached cautiously, and Marcus could see them trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they'd expected to find: a terrified staff, an active gunman. Instead, they found a man in nurse's scrubs calmly controlling a sobbing suspect with textbook-perfect restraint techniques. "Sir, we're going to need you to step back and let us take over," the lead officer said, his eyes narrowed with suspicion and curiosity. Marcus nodded and slowly, carefully released his hold on Trevor, rising to his feet and stepping back with his hands visible. The officers moved in, cuffing Trevor and reading him his rights, though the man seemed barely conscious of what was happening. As they hauled Trevor to his feet, he looked back at Marcus with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not killing me." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Get help, brother, real help, promise me." Trevor nodded weakly as the officers led him away. The moment they were gone, Sandra was in front of Marcus, her eyes blazing with a mixture of awe, confusion, and something like anger. "Marcus Rivera, you have exactly 10 seconds to tell me what the hell just happened here, because that," she pointed at where Trevor had been, "that was not normal nurse training." Around them, witnesses were starting to find their voices, talking over each other in shocked, rapid bursts. Someone had their phone out, and Marcus realized with sinking certainty that they'd probably recorded everything. Dr. Okonkwo stood beside Sandra, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "She's right. I've worked with trauma surgeons, former paramedics, even an ex-cop. None of them move like you just moved." Marcus looked at his hands, still steady, no tremor at all despite what he'd just done. He'd used violence again, had let the warrior out of the cage, and part of him was terrified by how easy it had been, how natural it had felt. He started, then stopped. What could he say? The secret he'd protected for months was about to explode into the open. The waiting room doors opened again, and more people flooded in: hospital administration, more police, a detective who immediately started asking questions. Marcus's old life and his new life were about to collide, and there was no stopping it now. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to Sandra, arrived 12 minutes after the incident. She was a 20-year veteran of the SDPD, sharp-eyed and thorough, and the moment she walked into St. Catherine's waiting room, Marcus knew his carefully constructed civilian life was about to be dissected like a cadaver on an autopsy table. The ER had transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the waiting area. Evidence markers numbered the bullet holes in the ceiling. A forensics team photographed everything while witnesses sat in exam rooms giving statements. The hospital administrator, a nervous man named Douglas Pierce, hovered near the entrance, simultaneously trying to manage the crisis and protect the hospital's liability. Marcus sat in a plastic chair near the nurse's station, a blanket someone had draped over his shoulders despite his insistence that he was fine. Sandra stood guard beside him like a protective lioness, having already snapped at two people who tried to question him before the police finished securing the scene. Detective Chen approached with a notepad and a recorder. She was Korean-American, early 40s, with streaks of gray in her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Marcus Rivera?" she asked, though she clearly already knew. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Detective Chen. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here." She pulled up a chair and sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her gaze intense. "First, I need to know if you're injured in any way. Do you need medical attention?" "No, ma'am, I'm fine." "Okay, can you walk me through what happened, from the moment Trevor Brennan entered the building?" Marcus recounted the events in precise, chronological order, the kind of after-action report he'd given dozens of times in his previous career. His delivery was calm, factual, devoid of emotional embellishment. He described Trevor's entrance, the shots fired, the escalation, his decision to engage verbally, and finally the moment when Trevor had pointed the weapon at the pregnant nurse. Detective Chen's pen stopped moving halfway through his description of the physical engagement. "Wait," she said, holding up a hand. "You moved 8 feet in approximately 2 seconds and disarmed a suspect holding a loaded weapon." "Yes, ma'am." "And you executed a—" She checked her notes, "wrist lock, leg sweep, and ground control technique that resulted in 0 injuries to the suspect or yourself." "That's correct." Detective Chen leaned back, studying him with renewed intensity. "Mr. Rivera, what's your background? Military, law enforcement?" Sandra's head snapped toward Marcus, her eyes widening. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I was in the Navy. I separated 2 years ago." "What was your rating?" There it was, the question he'd been dreading. Marcus met her eyes steadily. "I'd prefer not to discuss my specific role, ma'am, but I had training in emergency response and close-quarters situations." Detective Chen's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Rivera, a man with emergency response training, doesn't move the way witnesses say you moved. I have 7 people who watched what you did, and they all describe something that sounds like professional combat training at the highest levels." Before Marcus could respond, Dr. Okonkwo approached, her tablet in hand. "Detective, I have the security footage queued up if you want to see it." "Absolutely." They moved to the nurse's station where Patricia pulled up the video feed. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Of course there were cameras, multiple angles covering the entire waiting area, every second of his engagement with Trevor captured in high definition. The footage played on the tablet screen, and even Marcus was struck by what it showed. From the camera's perspective, the speed and efficiency of his movements looked even more dramatic. One moment he was standing 8 feet away, the next he was on Trevor, disarming him with movements so fast they almost blurred. Detective Chen watched it 3 times, then looked up at Marcus with something approaching awe. "Mr. Rivera, I've been a cop for 20 years. I've trained with SWAT, I've worked with FBI tactical teams, and I have never seen anyone move like that outside of military special operations." She paused. "Were you a SEAL?" The waiting room, despite the dozen people working the scene, suddenly felt very quiet. Sandra's hand went to her mouth. Jake, who'd been giving his statement to another officer, froze mid-sentence. Dr. Okonkwo's eyes widened with understanding. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." "Jesus Christ," Sandra whispered. "How long?" Detective Chen asked. 8 years, Team 3 out of Coronado. Medical separation 26 months ago. Combat deployments. 13. The detective sat back, processing this information. Around them, people were staring openly now. The forensics photographer had stopped working. One of the uniformed officers had his mouth hanging open. "So let me get this straight," Detective Chen said slowly. "A Navy SEAL has been working as a rookie nurse in this ER for how long?" 3.5 months. "And nobody knew." "I didn't advertise it," Marcus said quietly. "I left that life behind. I wanted to help people in a different way." Sandra's voice came out strangled. "Marcus, I've been training you, teaching you basic procedures. You let me think you were just a new nurse who happened to be calm under pressure." "You weren't wrong," Marcus said, meeting her eyes. "I am a new nurse. Everything you taught me I needed to learn. The other stuff, that's not who I am anymore, or who I'm trying to be." "But it's who you were 20 minutes ago," Dr. Okonkwo said, not unkindly. "When it mattered." Before Marcus could respond, Douglas Pierce rushed over, his phone pressed to his ear, his face flushed. "Detective, we have a problem. Someone already posted the security footage online. It's spreading on social media. We have news vans pulling up outside." "How did they get the footage?" Detective Chen demanded. "I don't know, but it's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, it's going viral." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Viral, his worst nightmare. Dr. Okonkwo pulled out her phone and typed rapidly, then held it up. The video was indeed everywhere, already with hundreds of thousands of views. The headlines were sensational. "Mystery Nurse DISA RMS Gunman in SECONDS," and "Hospital Workers' Incredible Takedown Caught on Camera." "Oh God," Marcus muttered. Detective Chen's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her expression shifted. "You're sure? Okay, I'll tell him." She hung up and looked at Marcus with new respect. "That was my lieutenant. He just got a call from Naval Special Warfare Command. Apparently, your former commanding officer saw the video and wants to talk to you." Marcus's head dropped into his hands. Commander James Mitchell. The man who'd been like a father to him, who'd fought to keep him on the teams after his injury, who'd been devastated when Marcus chose to leave entirely rather than take a training position. "It gets better," Detective Chen continued. "The media has already identified you. Your name is attached to the video. They're digging into your background. By tomorrow morning, your entire service record, at least the unclassified parts, will be public knowledge." Sandra sat down heavily in the chair beside Marcus. "This is insane." "Mr. Rivera," Detective Chen said, her tone softening slightly, "you're not in any trouble. What you did was lawful self-defense and defense of others. Trevor Brennan is being charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and a dozen other counts. You're a hero." "I'm not a hero," Marcus said firmly. "I just did what needed to be done." "The media won't see it that way. Neither will the public." She paused. "You saved lives today. At least 4 people would be dead if you hadn't acted. You need to accept that reality." Through the windows, Marcus could see the news vans multiplying. Cameras being set up. Reporters checking their hair and rehearsing their stand-ups. His anonymity, his quiet civilian life, was evaporating before his eyes. Jake approached hesitantly. "Marcus, man, I don't even know what to say. You're an actual Navy SEAL, and you've just been here working beside us, dealing with my screw-ups, helping me learn IV placements." "Because that's my job now," Marcus said. "That's who I want to be." "But you saved all our lives," Jake insisted. "That has to mean something." It did mean something. Marcus knew that. But it also meant exposure, attention, questions he didn't want to answer about missions he couldn't discuss, about friends he'd lost, about the violence he'd left behind. His phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Text messages flooding in from numbers he hadn't heard from in months, old teammates who'd seen the video, friends from his past who thought he'd disappeared forever. One message made his breath catch. "Saw what you did, brother, still got it. Always knew you'd find a way to keep fighting. Danny's brother, Mike." Danny, the friend who died because Marcus had hesitated a fraction of a second too long. The friend whose death had driven Marcus out of the teams and into nursing, seeking redemption through healing. "Mr. Rivera," Detective Chen's voice pulled him back. "I need you to stay available for follow-up questions, but you're free to go. I'd recommend going out the back entrance. The media is already asking for you by name at the front." Marcus nodded numbly and stood. Sandra immediately took his arm. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you somewhere quiet." As they walked toward the staff area, past colleagues who now looked at him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, Marcus realized that everything had changed. The secret he'd protected for months was now the only thing anyone would see when they looked at him. The nurse and the warrior had collided, and he had no idea which one would survive. By 6 p.m. that evening, Marcus Rivera's face was on every major news network in America. He sat in Dr. Okonkwo's office, the only place in the hospital that didn't have windows to the parking lot where news crews had set up camp, watching his life unravel on Patricia's computer screen. CNN was running the security footage on a loop. Fox News had dug up an old photo from his deployment days, barely recognizable with his full beard and tactical gear. MSNBC was interviewing security experts who analyzed his technique frame by frame. "The precision is remarkable," a retired Marine colonel was saying on the screen. "This is someone with extensive close-quarters combat training. Notice how he controls the weapon hand first, minimizes the suspect's ability to cause harm, then executes a textbook takedown. This is special operations level proficiency." Marcus's phone hadn't stopped buzzing in 3 hours. He'd turned off notifications, but the screen still lit up every few seconds with incoming messages, calls, friend requests from people he'd never met. Sandra entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, her expression still shell-shocked. "Media is asking for a statement. Douglas is having a panic attack in his office. Hospital board is having an emergency meeting." She handed Marcus a cup. "And there's a man in the lobby who says he's your former commanding officer. Security won't let him pass the desk without your approval." Marcus's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "Mitchell's here." "Is that his name? Big guy, crew cut, looks like he could bench press a car." Despite everything, Marcus felt a ghost of a smile. "That's him." "Do you want to see him?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, send him back." Sandra left, and 2 minutes later, Commander James Mitchell filled the doorway. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a polo shirt, but he still carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. At 6'3" and 240 pounds of muscle, he was an imposing figure. His face was weathered and scarred, but his eyes were sharp and kind. "Marcus," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Commander." Marcus stood, and then Mitchell crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled him into a crushing hug. "You stubborn son of a bitch," Mitchell said, his voice thick. 26 months, 26 months and not one word. Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" "I needed space, sir. Needed to figure out who I was without the teams." Mitchell pulled back, gripping Marcus's shoulders. "And apparently you figured out you're still the same hard-charging warrior you always were. That takedown was beautiful, son. Beautiful." "It wasn't supposed to happen," Marcus said quietly. "I left all that behind." "You can't leave behind what you are, Marcus. You can change your job, change your location, but you can't change what's in here." Mitchell tapped Marcus's chest. "When the moment came, you did what you were trained to do, what you were born to do. I wanted to save lives differently. And you did. You saved 4, maybe 5 people today. That pregnant nurse. She's 26 years old, first baby. The kid with the ear infection, 7 years old. That elderly man in the wheelchair. He's a grandfather of 12. Mitchell's voice intensified. "You saved them, Marcus. Just like you saved dozens of people on our missions. The method changed, but the mission didn't." Dr. Okonkwo knocked and entered without waiting for a response. "Sorry to interrupt, but Marcus, you need to see this." She turned her tablet to face him. It was a news segment, but not about the incident. It was an interview with James Kowalski. The veteran Marcus had helped with his panic attack weeks earlier. "Marcus Rivera is a hero," Kowalski was saying on screen, his eyes intense. "Not because of what he did today, though that was incredible. He's a hero because when I came into that ER having a panic attack, convinced I was dying, he didn't just treat my symptoms. He sat with me, talked to me veteran to veteran, gave me resources for PTSD treatment that literally saved my life. I started therapy because of him. This man doesn't just save lives in crisis moments. He saves them every single day." The screen cut to Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, the elderly woman from the exam room. "That dear boy has been taking care of me for months, always so patient, so kind. Today he pushed me out of harm's way before he did anything else. He protected me first, then he protected everyone else. That's who Marcus Rivera is." More interviews followed, patients he'd treated, colleagues he'd worked with. Jake spoke about how Marcus had mentored him despite being new himself. Sandra talked about his work ethic, his compassion, his dedication. "The narrative is shifting," Patricia said. "It's not just about the takedown anymore. People are talking about you as a person, as a nurse. Social media is flooded with support." Marcus's phone buzzed again, and this time he looked. A text from an unknown number. "I'm Sarah Brennan, Trevor's ex-wife. I need you to know he wasn't always like this. The military broke something in him and I didn't know how to help. What you did today, you could have killed him. Any jury would have understood, but you didn't. You controlled him, protected him, even while stopping him. You gave him a chance to get help. Thank you for seeing the man he used to be, even in his worst moment." Marcus's vision blurred. He hadn't thought about Trevor since the police had taken him away. Hadn't considered that his restraint, his choice to disable rather than destroy, might matter to anyone. Another message came through, this one from a number he recognized. Mike Martinez, Danny's younger brother. "Danny used to say you were the best of us, said you cared too much, felt too deeply, but that's what made you great. He'd be proud of what you've become, Marcus. Not because you stopped a gunman, but because you found a way to keep serving, keep protecting, even after losing him. He'd want you to know that his death wasn't your fault. It was war. It was chaos. It was nobody's fault. Stop carrying that weight, brother. You've earned the right to live without that burden." Marcus's hand shook as he set the phone down. 8 years of guilt, of self-recrimination, of believing he'd failed his best friend, and Mike was telling him to let it go. "Marcus," Sandra's voice was gentle, "there's something else. Hospital administration wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're not firing you, quite the opposite, actually. Douglas mentioned something about an emergency preparedness position." Commander Mitchell nodded approvingly. "Makes sense. You've got skills this hospital needs, especially now. Active shooter preparedness, crisis management, trauma response training." "I just want to be a nurse," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are a nurse," Patricia said firmly. "A damn good one, but you're also other things. You don't have to choose one identity or the other, Marcus. You can be both." Through the office window, the one that faced the interior hallway, not the media circus outside, Marcus could see staff members walking by. Some glanced toward the office with curiosity. Others nodded respectfully. A few gave him thumbs up. His phone lit up again. Another message, this time from the hospital's group chat that the ER staff used. It was from Jake. "For anyone wondering, Marcus is still the same guy who stayed 2 hours past his shift last week to help me with my charting, who brings coffee for Sandra every morning, who remembers every patient's name and actually listens to their stories. He's still our teammate. Maybe now we just understand why he's so damn good at it." Responses flooded in. "Agreed, Marcus's family. Still the best nurse on the floor, SEAL or not. We've got your back, Marcus. Stop hiding in Patricia's office and come have dinner with us. We ordered pizza." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying since the moment Trevor had walked through those doors. maybe since the moment he'd walked away from the teams 26 months ago. "They're right, you know," Mitchell said, watching Marcus's face. "You found your new team. Different uniform, different mission, but still a team. Still brothers and sisters who have your back." "I was afraid they'd see me differently," Marcus admitted. "They do," Patricia said. "They see you more completely now, all of you, and they're still here." Sandra opened the door wider. "So are you coming to get pizza, or are you going to hide in here all night? Because I swear to God, Marcus, if you make us eat all this food ourselves." For the first time in hours, Marcus laughed, really laughed. It felt like releasing a pressure valve that had been sealed too tight for too long. "Yeah," he said, standing up. "Yeah, I'm coming." As he walked out of the office, flanked by Sandra and Patricia, with Commander Mitchell following behind, Marcus realized something profound. He hadn't lost himself today. He'd found himself. The warrior and the healer weren't separate. They never had been. They were two expressions of the same core truth. Marcus Rivera was a protector. Whether he wore camouflage or scrubs didn't change that fundamental reality. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more media attention, difficult conversations with hospital administration, possibly even speaking engagements or interviews he'd rather avoid. But tonight he'd have pizza with his new team, the people who'd accepted all of him, past and present, warrior and healer. And for the first time in 26 months, that felt like enough. 2 months later, Marcus stood before a packed conference room at St. Catherine's Hospital, but this time he wasn't hiding. The trident pin hung on a silver chain beneath his scrubs, visible when he leaned forward, a reminder rather than a secret. "The goal in an active threat situation," he explained, clicking to the next slide, "is not to be a hero. It's to survive and protect as many people as possible until help arrives." His eyes swept the room, 60 staff members from various departments, all hanging on his every word. But survival requires training, preparation, and the ability to act when your body wants to freeze. This was his new role, Emergency Preparedness Coordinator, still working clinical shifts, but now also responsible for training staff in crisis response. The hospital board had created the position specifically for him, recognizing that his unique skill set could save lives beyond bedside care. Sandra sat in the front row, no longer looking at him with shock but with pride. Beside her, Dr. Okonkwo took meticulous notes. Jake was in the back, recording everything on his phone for the night shift staff who couldn't attend. "Let's run through the barricade drill one more time," Marcus said, and the room erupted into organized chaos as staff members practiced securing doors, moving patients to safe positions, and establishing communication protocols. Watching them work, Marcus felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since leaving the teams. This was different from combat, but no less important. Every person he trained was someone who might save lives when seconds mattered. After the session, a young man approached hesitantly. He was thin, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that Marcus immediately recognized. The man's jacket sleeve rode up, revealing the edge of a tattoo, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the Marine Corps. "Mr. Rivera, I'm David Chen. I saw your story on the news." "Just Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Marine Corps." David's surprise showed. "How did you?" "The way you stand, the tattoo, the look in your eyes," Marcus gestured to a quiet corner. "How long you been out?" 14 months, medical discharge after Fallujah. IED took my hearing in my left ear and," David's voice dropped, "took my sense of who I was supposed to be." Marcus knew that feeling intimately. "What are you doing now?" "Warehouse work, night shifts. It's fine, I guess, but," David struggled with the words. "I saw what you did, saw that you'd found a way to keep serving, to use your training to help people instead of," he trailed off, unable to finish. "Instead of feeling like all that sacrifice was wasted," Marcus supplied gently. David nodded, his eyes glistening. They told me I was a hero, gave me a Purple Heart, then sent me home to figure out the rest of my life alone. I don't feel like a hero. I feel lost. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened a document he'd been working on. 3 weeks ago, I started a program. It's called Guardian Transition, helping combat veterans move into healthcare careers. Nursing, EMT work, physician assistants, even therapy and counseling. He handed David a business card. We provide scholarship support, mentorship, PTSD counseling, and job placement. We just got our first round of funding approved. David stared at the card like it was a lifeline. You think someone like me could do this? Be a nurse? David, you spent years taking care of your brothers and sisters in combat. You know triage, trauma response, working under pressure. You have exactly what it takes. Marcus's voice intensified. More than that, you understand what other veterans go through. Guys like James Kowalski, remember him from the news. They need caregivers who get it, who have been there. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You survived Fallujah. You survived losing part of your hearing and your sense of identity. You're here, asking for help, which is the hardest thing a warrior ever does. Marcus gripped David's shoulder. That's not weakness, brother. That's the bravest thing you can do. David's facade cracked and tears spilled down his cheeks. I just want to feel like I matter again, like my service meant something. It did, it does, and it will continue to. Marcus handed him a tissue. Come to the information session next Tuesday. No commitment, just listen. See if it resonates. And David, the best warriors aren't the ones who fight forever. They're the ones who know when to put down the rifle and pick up something else. After David left, with a spark of hope in his eyes that hadn't been there before, Sandra approached with 2 cups of coffee. You're making a difference, you know, she said, handing him a cup. A real, lasting difference. I'm trying. No, you're succeeding. I've had 3 veterans contact me asking about the nursing program because they heard about you. The hospital's getting calls from other facilities wanting to implement similar training. She smiled. You found your mission, Marcus. He looked around the conference room, at the evacuation diagrams still on the whiteboard, at the staff members lingering to ask questions about the training, at David's business card still sitting on the table. You know what's strange, Marcus said. For 2 years I thought I had to choose between being a SEAL and being a nurse, like they were opposite things, incompatible identities. And now I realize they're the same thing. Different tools, different environments, but the same core mission. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Save lives. Stand between danger and the innocent. He touched the trident pin through his scrubs. I don't have to be one or the other. I can be both. That evening, as Marcus walked to his car through the parking lot, no longer sneaking out the back to avoid reporters who'd moved on to the next story, he passed a recruitment office for the Navy. The poster in the window showed a SEAL emerging from water, and for the first time in months, Marcus looked at it without the crushing weight of guilt and loss. He pulled out his phone and composed a text to Mike Martinez. You were right. Danny would be proud, not of the takedown or the medals or any of that. He'd be proud that I found a way forward, that I'm helping other warriors find their way too. I'm finally ready to let go of the guilt. Thank you for giving me permission. The response came within minutes. Danny always said you were the one who'd figure it out, the one who'd find the way to bridge both worlds. Proud of you, brother. He's proud too. I know it. Marcus stood in the parking lot, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. A car pulled up, Commander Mitchell, here for their weekly dinner. The older man rolled down the window, grinning. You ready, or you going to stand there looking philosophical all night? Yeah, I'm ready. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat. How was the training today? Good, really good. Met a Marine who's thinking about joining the program. 4th one this week. Mitchell clapped him on the shoulder. You're building something important here, Marcus. a legacy that'll outlast both of us. As they drove toward the restaurant, Marcus watched the city lights begin to flicker on, each one representing someone living their life, someone who might need protection, might need healing, might need a warrior who'd learned to be a healer. His phone buzzed with a message from the Guardian Transition Program Coordinator. 8 new applications today. This is really taking off. 8 warriors looking for a new mission. 8 people he might help find purpose again. 8 lives that could be redirected from darkness toward light. The nurse and the warrior, not separate, not conflicting, but unified. 2 aspects of the same calling, the same commitment to service. Marcus Rivera had finally found his place in the world, not by choosing between his past and his future, but by weaving them together into something new, something stronger. He was a protector, whether wearing camouflage or scrubs, whether holding a rifle or a stethoscope, that fundamental truth remained unchanged. And as the city lights blurred past the window, Marcus smiled, a genuine, unforced smile, because for the first time since Danny's death, he understood that his story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The warrior had become a healer. The healer had always been a warrior. And in the space where those 2 identities met, Marcus Rivera had discovered his true calling, to stand as a bridge between worlds, helping others find their way home. His mission continued, different battlefield, same heart. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
Detto questo, ci sono tante sfaccettature, la maturità emotiva ed intellettuale forse, esatto, sì, l'empatia, il rendersi conto che gli altri sono uguali a te, sono d'accordo. Non bannarlo. Diciamo che oggi molte persone sono poco avvezze all'uso del cervello, quindi diciamo che si vive in una società dove la stupidità di base è la normalità. Però non è neanche giusto pensarla in questo modo, perché io ad esempio so che voi non siete stupidi e io credo di non esserlo, perché sennò non sareste qui. Anche perché questo non è un canale stupido, non è un canale in cui facciamo il grande fratello. Capite? Va bene. Anyway, vediamo un attimo com'è questo livello. Ok, immaginavo. Allora, la rampetta immagino che sia quello che mi serve per arrivare dall'altra parte, perché qua la porta non la vedo. Ah no, invece qui. No, ma io sono arrivato da... Ah, io sono arrivato da lì? E la porta dov'è? Eccola là! Eh? Eh? Che cosa c'è laggiù?